Welcome to another virtual interview in the series of interviews of The Rise of the Modern GC. I'm joined today by Natalie Connor, and she is General Counsel at Flatfair. Before I introduce Natalie to you, I just wanted to re-emphasise the reason why we're doing these interviews. Throughout my recruitment career, I get a lot of questions asked by lawyers around their career and next steps. And since I've moved into in-house, specialising in in-house recruitment, I'm asked by lawyers wanting to transition into in-house or legal counsel already in-house about next steps that they would want to achieve in respect to getting to strategic and/or management positions. So I felt that speaking to a variety of different senior lawyers from different backgrounds might create more information out there, and it will definitely show that no career is the same and approaches have been different. So welcome, Natalie. Natalie is, as I mentioned, General Counsel from Flatfair. Natalie practiced as a barrister between 2014 and 2020, then becoming General Counsel. Flatfair is an award-winning PropTech startup backed by Index Ventures, which offers landlord and tenants rental solutions and protection via its technology. Welcome again, Natalie. So could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Donna. My name's Natalie Connor. I'm General Counsel at Flatfair. Previously practiced as a barrister, firstly out of 7 kbw and then 11 kbw. So my background is essentially quite multidisciplinary, sort of spans everything from commercial contract law to data privacy, employment, and quite a lot of regulatory law. And then, perhaps quite unusually, I then went straight in-house to Flatfair in January of last year. Which was great fun for the first few months. And then, of course, COVID hit. So since then, I've been largely working from home along with the rest of the business, although we do still have a small office space in WeWork in Monument. So I do occasionally get to see other humans. But yeah, my story is, I suppose, a little bit different because I essentially bypassed working for a solicitor's firm and bypassed kind of working as part of a huge team prior to coming in-house. And yeah, went from, the self-employed bar to basically a fully autonomous senior legal role as a one-woman band at Flatfair. So yeah, I'm General Counsel. I'm head of legal compliance and also currently head of people, at least temporarily. I report directly into our CEO, Franz, and I manage others on the people side of the business, and was also hoping to grow the legal function quite substantially this year. But COVID has kind of put those plans temporarily on hold. So that's meant that I've had to be quite a bit more hands-on and done, pretty much everything myself. So I'm sure we'll revisit that soon in the course of your questions. And yeah, it's been a great year, COVID notwithstanding. I was actually made a statutory director of the business back in February of this year. So I sit on the board now alongside two of our founders, our non-exec, and a director appointed by Index Ventures, who are our main investor. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and how I've got to the place I've got to.
I'm interested to know what the trigger was for you to move from the role that you were doing into in-house. What was the appetite around you joining Flatfair?
My story, I suppose, and it's completely personal to me and unique to me. I had become slightly disillusioned by sort of independent practice at the bar by the time I left. In many ways, it was really great. I met a lot of great people, particularly at 11 kbw. It's an absolutely fantastic set of chambers and does some fantastic work. And I had great opportunities there, particularly for somebody like me who was non-privately educated and also non-Oxbridge educated, which is still quite a rare combination at the bar, I think. And, I made quite a lot of money doing it, but I just fundamentally didn't enjoy frontline litigation in the end. And found that basically over time I got more of a kick out of advising my clients on how to avoid it and sort of helping them put their disputes into the wider business context that was affecting their operations. So I enjoyed that side of my role, but I kind of felt like I was missing out on seeing that advice come to fruition and be implemented. So I basically reached a point where I thought, I want to work for a single client. I want to sort of exclusively further their interests. And I want to be able to care about that and get invested in that on, as much a commercial level as a legal one. And then I sort of started thinking a bit more about what sort of space I wanted to work in, and thought, I think the disruptive space, technology companies that are disrupting sort of traditional fields and traditional markets would be a great chance to, demonstrate some creativity and innovation, both in, the business sense and in the legal sense. And then I also wanted to retain as much of what I liked about my practice at the bar as possible. So I knew I wanted to kind of retain the level of independence and autonomy that I'd been used to as, I suppose, a self-employed practitioner as much as possible. I wanted to retain a lot of responsibility. I wanted to retain the ability to really say what I think in a kind of intellectually honest way. And I knew I wanted as much variety as possible, because I really, really enjoyed that kind of portfolio aspect of my of private practice. So I knew that if I could find that, that's sort of what an in-house career represented for me, really. It would be the best of what I'd done to date and more of it, with maybe less of what I didn't enjoy so much, which is essentially sort of, lots and lots of litigation, which is ultimately bad for everyone and bad for business. So yeah, it was quite a unique niche that I was looking for, because I wanted a role where I could basically be the sole lawyer or head up a small team, at least to begin with. So that meant, looking at startups and scale-ups. And yeah, I sort of fired off loads of applications and actually came across Flatfair on LinkedIn and applied to them directly. And it was just a kind of great fit right out of the gate. I met all of the founders several times, who are all absolutely incredible guys, all in their early 30s, first time founders, really, really stellar backgrounds, Deutsche Bank, Google, and the rest has been history, really. But it was, quite a unique move, I suppose, in many ways, to have gone straight from the bar in-house. But yeah, that's essentially the story of what triggered it and how I thought about it and approached it.
Fantastic. And has that led into sort of your appetite to want to participate in the interviews today? Because you've got an incredible story and it is fairly unique. So what was your appeal to speaking about the topic of the rise of the modern GC?
Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. I do think it's important for aspiring GCs and aspiring senior in-house lawyers to appreciate that there isn't a set route to getting to this position. It's very much not a one-size-fits-all approach. My trajectory is obviously not necessarily an obvious one, so I think I was quite keen to share my story to provide some almost reassurance and encouragement to people who might want to try and approach this in less traditional ways. And I think it's great that you and Jameson Legal recognise that and want to help, facilitate that and kind of broaden the knowledge base in that respect.
Perfect, thank you. So how is a GC role in a tech scale-up different to a more traditional GC role? Are there distinct differences, and are these good or bad?
I think the first thing to be aware of is that when you join a startup or a scale-up as the first lawyer, or certainly the first senior lawyer that business has had, there's really no set way of doing things. There's sort of no established legal processes, really. There's no established relationships with external advisors. And it pretty much falls to you to set that up entirely from scratch. And so that means, quite uniquely, I think, that you really need to sort of fully immerse yourself in that business in order to understand its kind of basic legal needs. And so for me, that meant, sitting in on absolutely every meeting I could get into, however sort of seemingly irrelevant, meeting as many people as I could across the business at absolutely every level, so that I could really get to grips with our processes and our products, reading everything I could find from, old investor decks to our Series A documentation, marketing materials, interactions that people in the businesses had with our partners and competitors. And you have to sort of really be a sponge for the first couple of months. And then I suppose once you are immersed and you do feel like you understand everything, the biggest difficulty in a sort of startup scale-up GC role, as opposed to a GC role in a more established company, is finding the time to sort of stop firefighting. That's the biggest difficulty, and actually sort of set up processes that transcend you as an individual, and sort of are able to scale with the business and ultimately kind of help it to self-serve. At some point, you just have to try and, carve out the time to do that. If other reason than for kind of business continuity, really. So that's probably the biggest challenge that any lawyer will face in a, you know, dynamic startup environment. And I suppose GCs and all lawyers really in a startup environment also need to be prepared to be really quite hands-on, particularly when times are tough. You know, so the last year is a pretty extreme example of that with COVID. You know, that certainly had an impact on our business. So, you know, one minute I'd be advising the board on issues, you know, which carried potentially a huge amount of legal risk. And the next minute I'd be, I don't know, helping somebody respond to a data subject access request, you know, helping one of my HR assistants draft a new grievance policy, or I'd be liaising with HMRC about share option valuations. And so I suppose in my case, that's where my sort of quite multi-specialist background actually really came in handy. So it meant that I could really add value and, you know, save the business some money while maybe funds were a bit less available for kind of, you know, excessive external spend. So that adaptability is always important if you want to do this job in a startup. And I suppose that differs, you know, quite fundamentally from joining a more established business or a larger business as a GC, because there you really need to show that you've done it all before. You know, you've work, then you've set up and scaled a function. And the beauty and I suppose the burden of joining a startup as a GC is that you kind of can and must do all of that yourself from scratch. So neither role is good or bad, I'd say. It really just depends what galvanizes you and whether you sort of prefer, you know, to join somewhere with kind of more structure right out of the gate, where you can always make changes and improvements, but there are established ways of doing things. Maybe there's already an established team versus, you know, learning by doing and kind of trial and error and setting things up yourself. And in my case, I just find the latter really rewarding, and the startup world really suits me and my personality, but both are great and are very rewarding.
Yes, it's really good information, because I get asked a lot of questions from legal counsel who are interviewing for sole legal counsel roles. And I think even at the point of second and third interviews, they really don't understand the full concept of what the requirement will be to go into a sole legal counsel role right out of private practice. And I think it's important to really understand exactly how you would go about immersing yourself into a business and its operations so that you can operate effectively as a legal counsel.
Yeah, for sure.
So what factors do you take into consideration when scaling the team, and how do you go about doing this?
Well, in my case, I've actually had to put scaling our legal team temporarily on hold due to obviously the impact of COVID, but I do hope to revisit that very soon, and I do have kind of plans in place ready to go as soon as circumstances permit us to revisit them. But how you scale and kind of where you start, I think always depends on the nature of your business and its legal requirements, which probably sounds obvious, but you know, if you're spending all day as a sole lawyer looking at high churn, low value contracts, and you know, you're likely going to want to start with a paralegal or two to sort of take that off your plate. If like us, you know, you're a tech company, but you're dealing with lots of kind of human and payment elements within your business model, then you might want to start with getting a good sort of compliance person in to take things like GDPR and anti-bribery and PCI DSS and other kind of more regulatory matters off your plate. But you know, and you should also always, I think about whether it makes sense to scale your team in-house in the traditional sense in terms of hiring in, or whether it actually might make more commercial sense, at least for a period, to outsource help, you know, either to just traditional law firms or to the sort of growing number of more legal optimization companies who might end up being actually more efficient and cost effective. And maybe even more reliable than hiring into the team. So, I mean, I personally use a company called the Law Boutique, who've been excellent at helping, you know, me with contract review and things like that. So they've been very impressive, and they can also help, you know, busy GCs set up insourcing solutions as well. So helping the business to self-serve, you know, helping the business to understand what a data subject access request is and how to respond to it without you really having to be involved, helping them understand which contracts they don't really need to refer to you and which they do and what the thresholds are. So yeah, it really depends on the business, and understanding what the needs are, and looking back over your own time, I suppose, over a period of time, and seeing where, the value adds are.
And how do you see technology changing in-house legal teams?
Well, I think technology is changing and optimizing all business areas in all sectors, and legal is and should be no exception. I think legal tech can solve an awful lot of pain points for lawyers in general, because there's absolutely everything from document management tools that sort of store and index and help you search documents, to sort of contract management software providers that can help with things like automation and helping you get better visibility over your entire book, introducing checks and balances, which is particularly important in certain parts of the business. It's important, for example, on the commercial side of our business, that I have various checks and balances in place to make sure I know which contracts are going out and which thresholds are never exceeded. And I've got some contract management software that helps me with that. And there's, kind of an AI element to both of those solutions these days, more and more. So legal tech trying to remove the human element where possible. I don't think it's possible for AI to entirely replace lawyers, but I think there's further to go in that respect, and it could be a really, really helpful thing and introduce some great efficiencies. I'm also seeing a lot more ideas about, action management and dashboard tools, which is particularly good, I think, for bigger teams, particularly in-house teams where you've got, siloed sub teams doing different things, helping those people to kind of manage their own time and their own task list, and helping them to engage in a more obvious way with the rest of the business, and having a set process in place. And then, having sort of data insights as well, into what the legal team's doing and how well it's doing, which helps obviously with performance managing your team and planning capacity for your team. So, it's always going to depend on your business and your team size as to kind of which of these tools will be useful. And obviously needs will vary, I think, whether you're in-house or whether you're in private practice. But as I've said, I've certainly utilised quite a lot of these tools already, and I plan to do so even more in the future.
Great. Hindsight's always a great thing, as we know. What's the biggest piece of advice you'd go back and give yourself now if you were starting out as a general counsel?
I think, having done this job for a while now, I think, and this is very much unique to the role of a GC in a startup environment, I'd say you need to learn to take a sort of 80-20 approach to your role. You'll want to do everything, but you just can't. There aren't enough hours in the day. There aren't enough people in the business. And that's okay. Learning that that's okay, and learning sort of as quickly as you can to identify what the really business critical stuff is. Addressing that first, and making sure that you understand that fully by sort of speaking to as many different people as possible about things, so that you can sort of triangulate their views and ultimately try and, help the business get to yes as much as possible. Hopefully I've kind of always done that, but I would certainly go back and tell myself to maybe give myself a break, not worry about some of the less important stuff, and learning to let go of that. That would be my biggest piece of advice to my slightly younger self.
Fantastic. The whole concept of work-life balance, we talk about, I talk to lawyers just saying, private practice hours are not sustainable, particularly those who've been doing them for considerable periods of time. And I certainly speak to my fair share of legal counsel who are also working, quite long hours. What's the concept of work-life balance in-house? What does that look like for you, if there is work-life balance in your mind?
I mean, for me personally, work-life balance is really important. And I think to a large extent, it depends on the person and how much you prioritise that and how much your business prioritises that. At Flatfair, we certainly take that very seriously, as much as we can, because at the end of the day, we're working in a startup environment. Everyone's working very hard. And I've come from a background of, independent practice at the bar where, all-nighters were pretty routine if you're in the middle of a huge 2-week commercial court trial or something. It certainly isn't as bad as that most of the time. But, I do occasionally have to work longer hours and work weekends if we've got something urgent to do. But in general, I, can preserve a good amount of work-life balance. I feel quite strongly about that. I'm fortunately in a position where I can air my views on that, you know, both in terms of my own situation and in terms of the whole business, because I head up HR. So I'm able to speak to, you know, the other board members quite regularly about that and put initiatives in place to support that. And it's been quite interesting, I suppose, over the last year, thinking about how to adapt those initiatives to the COVID situation and the kind of remote working situation. You know, how do you encourage people to take a break when they're not in the office? I think a lot of people thought working from home would be better for work-life balance, and maybe in some respects it is, but in other ways it isn't. You know, sometimes it's harder then to switch off and to draw a line under the end of the working day. So yeah, I mean, I personally will, you know, close the door on my office at the end of the day and try and keep that separation physically as well as mentally. But everyone's got their own sort of little initiatives and solutions there. But yeah, for me, it's very important, and I think everyone should take it personally. I don't think it helps anyone for you to burn out.
Agreed. Natalie, thanks very much for sharing today. It's been really nice to speak to you, and thanks for participating. It's very much appreciated. If anybody has any further questions that they would like to ask to either myself or to you, please don't hesitate to reach out via my email address. If you are head of Associate General Counsel or General Counsel and would like to get involved in the interviews of the Rise of the Modern GC, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'd be delighted to share some more information with you. So thanks again, Natalie. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks so much, Donna.
Thank you. Bye.